In the freezing winter months of early 2022, an economic weapon of unprecedented scale was silently deployed against a nuclear superpower without firing a single physical bullet across international borders. Within 48 hours of geopolitical escalation, Western central banks froze over $300 billion of sovereign foreign reserves belonging to the State Bank of Russia, shocking world leaders completely. Imagine looking into your personal bank account tomorrow morning, only to find that the local manager has locked you out completely because they strongly disagreed with your private neighborhood arguments. This single, terrifying financial event triggered a massive, quiet panic across capital cities from Beijing to New Delhi, setting off an aggressive geopolitical race that aims to restructure global commerce forever. If you want to comprehend why a historic alliance of non-Western nations is working around the clock to build a completely independent financial world order, you must look closely at this shifting landscape. I break down one critical global economic narrative every week using verified data. So if you want to understand how these massive macroeconomic shifts directly affect your personal financial future, hit subscribe. To truly understand the origin of this massive global challenge, we have to travel back to the comfortable offices of Wall Street during the optimistic autumn months of the year 2001. An influential chief economist working at Goldman Sachs named Jim O'Neill noticed that Brazil, Russia, India, and China were growing at an incredibly rapid pace compared to traditional Western industrial powers. He created a catchy financial acronym to group these fast-growing markets together for wealthy international investors, completely unaware that these distant nations would later turn his simple marketing phrase into reality. What started out as a clever investment thesis quickly transformed into a powerful political reality when these regional powers held their very first official diplomatic summit in Russia in 2009. By the time South Africa officially joined the group 1 year later, this newly formed coalition represented a massive chunk of humanity that felt systematically locked out of Western international governance. For over 7 long decades, the United States dollar has enjoyed what French politicians famously called an exorbitant privilege, allowing America to run massive deficits simply by printing more global currency papers. Because nearly 85% of all international trade transactions require greenbacks, every single country is forced to accumulate massive stockpiles of American currency just to buy basic, everyday imported goods. Think about a local bakery that is forced to buy special tokens from a rival merchant across town just to purchase flour from a farmer who lives directly down the very same street. This brings us directly to the first major open loop of our economic mystery, because the real secret weapon keeping this entire system alive is not physical military hardware or vast oil fields. The absolute dominance of the greenback relies entirely on a massive global network effect, which means it remains incredibly valuable simply because every other country has already agreed to accept it unconditionally. But here is the critical part that most traditional financial commentators completely fail to mention when they analyze the potential collapse of this long-standing international monetary framework. When Western nations collectively cut off major Russian financial institutions from the secure SWIFT messaging network in 2022, they inadvertently shattered the foundational illusion of global financial neutrality. Suddenly, holding massive piles of American debt securities looked less like a safe, risk-free investment asset and felt much more like a potential political trap that could turn against you. The economic group expanded dramatically in January 2024 by welcoming major oil-producing giants like Iran and the United Arab Emirates, shifting the global balance of energy resources forever. With these new energy superpowers sitting at the exact same table, the coalition now controls over 35% of global economic output when measured by purchasing power parity metrics. This massive demographic weight means they now officially outstrip the traditional economic power of the Western G7 nations, creating a highly volatile situation that traditional media outlets rarely explain clearly. Before I reveal the highly counterintuitive reason why a unified physical currency will probably never happen, let us examine how these nations are already bypassing Western banks right now. Instead of spending years attempting to design a single paper note to replace the greenback, these countries are quietly weaponizing advanced digital technology to settle massive bilateral sovereign trades directly. China and India have started purchasing millions of barrels of crude oil using their own national currencies, completely ignoring the traditional petrodollar system that has underpinned global energy trade for generations. Russia has entirely adapted its domestic financial architecture to use the Chinese yuan for the vast majority of its international commerce, demonstrating that alternative trade ecosystems are completely viable today. What you just discovered about alternative energy trade is incredibly important, but it also highlights a completely different question that is currently keeping central bankers awake at night across Washington. Can a decentralized group of historic regional rivals truly cooperate long enough to build a stable, permanent international alternative that can actually withstand a major global financial crisis? This is the exact moment where our narrative takes a highly dramatic turn, because the deep geopolitical realities inside the alliance are incredibly complicated and filled with intense historical friction. To understand this tension, we must look closely at the long-standing Himalayan border disputes between China and India, two massive nuclear powers who view each other with deep strategic suspicion. India is highly reluctant to support any international monetary mechanism that would inadvertently turn the Chinese yuan into the undisputed dominant currency across the entire Asian continent. Because a true unified currency like the euro requires nations to completely surrender their independent monetary policy to a single central bank, these proud sovereign superpowers face an impossible structural dilemma. Imagine trying to design a single household budget shared between two highly competitive neighbors who constantly argue about their personal spending habits and future career goals every single day. Therefore, the grand announcement of a physical gold-backed alternative note is largely a strategic distraction designed to generate sensational headlines across international news networks, while the real work happens elsewhere. The actual threat to Western financial dominance is far more subtle and sophisticated than a simple paper replacement, operating through an advanced system known to central bankers as Project mBridge. This advanced digital platform allows multiple central banks to instantly settle multi-million-dollar cross-border transactions using specialized blockchain technology, completely bypassing the traditional commercial banking infrastructure of New York. By utilizing decentralized ledger technology, these countries can move billions of dollars across international borders in fractions of a second without leaving any visible footprints for Western regulatory monitors to track. This brings us to the emotional peak of our global economic story, a profound realization that changing the world reserve currency is a messy process that takes multiple decades to fully materialize. History shows us that when the American dollar eventually replaced the British pound sterling after the conclusion of World War II, the actual transition period took over 30 painful years to complete. The economic infrastructure of the world does not simply shift overnight because of a single political summit or a fiery speech delivered by an angry world leader in front of cameras. What we are witnessing today is not the sudden, explosive death of the greenback, but rather the structural fragmentation of the unified global financial marketplace into separate regional trade blocs. Stay with me for the next 2 minutes, because what I am about to explain next reveals exactly how this quiet financial fragmentation will ultimately impact your personal purchasing power at home. As more countries begin to settle their international trade invoices using local currencies, the total global demand for American debt securities will slowly but surely experience a noticeable decline. To compensate for this shrinking international demand, the Federal Reserve may eventually be forced to maintain much higher interest rates for a significantly longer period just to attract foreign capital. This means that your future mortgages, personal car loans, and credit card balances could become permanently more expensive simply because distant nations decided to trade oil in alternative currencies. The era of cheap consumer goods funded by endless foreign purchasing of American debt instruments is quietly drawing to a close, forcing Western consumers to adapt to a highly inflationary reality. Now let us look at the practical solution that forward-thinking international investors are currently utilizing to protect their hard-earned wealth from this slow-motion monetary collision. Savvy financial minds are actively diversifying their long-term portfolios away from pure fiat currency exposure by accumulating tangible physical assets with intrinsic value like gold and strategic commodities. Central banks across the global south purchased record-breaking quantities of physical gold bullion over the past few years, signaling their deep institutional distrust in the long-term stability of paper assets. They are not trying to destroy the existing system out of pure malice, but but are simply building a sturdy financial lifeboat before the next major macroeconomic storm hits the international banking sector. Understanding this structural shift allows you to position your own personal investments calmly, instead of reacting with pure panic when the next round of sensational financial headlines breaks. So let us pull this entire complex geopolitical narrative together into a clear, comprehensive picture, so you can walk away with a precise understanding of this monumental global transformation. First, the absolute weaponization of Western banking networks in 2022 destroyed the fundamental assumption that the international financial system is a completely safe space for foreign assets. Second, the newly expanded 10-nation alliance now possesses the immense demographic and economic weight required to build completely independent supply chains that completely bypass traditional Western institutions. Third, the ultimate replacement for the greenback will not be a singular physical competitor note, but rather a sophisticated network of digital local payment systems operating entirely outside Western control. Finally, this gradual economic transition will likely create a far more fragmented world characterized by structurally higher inflation rates and elevated borrowing costs for average Western consumers everywhere. The official name for this profound historic transformation is monetary multipolarity, and once you recognize its subtle signs, you will begin to see its powerful effects playing out across global news every day. If you found this data-driven geopolitical breakdown valuable, please take a single second to subscribe to the channel and share this specific video with one intelligent person who deserves to understand macroeconomic realities. Initiating just one serious conversation about these hidden financial shifts could completely alter how your closest friends look at the long-term future of money and their own personal wealth preservation strategies. Thank you deeply for spending your valuable time watching this detailed analysis, and I look forward to seeing you in our next deep dive into the hidden forces shaping our global economic landscape.